Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, returning guest. It's Courtenay Turner. If you've listened to my show, you've listened to a number of our older episodes, and we are doing a part 2 about Game B. And the last one was very well received, but it wasn't our only show. I've been on her show. We talked about Balenciaga and Knights of Malta, Hospitallers, Templars, and Pilgrim Society, and then we've talked about the Tavistock Institute as well. She's talked about that with me. But again, like I said, this will be part 2. And if you're watching this on Rumble, Rockfin, or Twitter X, you will see the picture of Jim Rutt, kind of like the founder of this, like the originator or maybe the front guy of Game B and at the Santa Fe Institute. And we were talking in the pre-show about some interesting connections. Santa Fe obviously is in New Mexico, where Jeffrey Epstein had one of his bases with a lot of nefarious activities. But he financed or gave money to the Santa Fe Institute, I think, according to my research, about $250,000. But there's another interesting connection, which is one of Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell. One of his other daughters, Christine, was a trustee of the Santa Fe Institute. And one of the interesting things about her, aside from her interest in computer technology and the fact that she has a doctorate, very accomplished person, but she married a guy by the name of Malina, Malina, and I believe that's a Czech last name. But what is interesting about him is that his dad was Frank Malina, who was a member of the Suicide Squad. So if you've listened to any of my shows about Jack Parsons, JPL, you'll know that it was Malina, Parsons, and Ed Foreman were together, who were all at Caltech, and they would do all these experiments on the Arroyo Grande area of Pasadena, while Jack Parsons would recite Crowley's Hymn to Pan, among other things. But kind of interestingly ties into my earlier shows that I did recently about this character who was summoning the lady, which is what Jack Parsons was doing with Hubbard in the desert, was summoning this kind of lady female entity during the Babylon working, right? It's a female entity, but very interesting ties that overlap and come into this whole Santa Fe Institute, which there's another interesting thing. They had some party where they literally reconstructed this huge monolith that was an exact replica of the monolith from 2001 Space Odyssey. I've been trying to find that picture. I think it's in one of my older things. But anyway, long intro, getting back to this whole Game B, really fascinating. Glad to have her back, Courtenay Turner. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Wow, that's a crazy connection. But
it really is. It really is. It really is something else. But it is a strange place, the Santa Fe Institute, and it's also kind of a new age area, right? I think Santa Fe, and what's the other one that's in Arizona? There's some, they're kind of like these little new age areas. Ojai in California, or Esalen, yeah.
But Ojai was an outgrowth. Yeah, well, I think of Santa Fe as very much like the more sciencey, and I put that in air quotes, but kind of version of Esalen. But the Ojai Foundation is fascinating. It was originally the Happy Valley, which was Annie Besant's.
Oh, wow.
Straight out of Theosophy. And they were doing all sorts of very interesting kind of ritual stuff over there. And I think there was actually, what was it called? The Crotal, I don't know what the rest of the name of it was, but that was also it's where they groomed Alice Bailey, and that's in Ohio, I believe.
Ojai it's like a centerpiece, and the world teacher, the Indian guy, ended up in Ojai. He came all the way from India. It was
well, that's Krishnamurti.
Krishnamurti, yeah. So they have a Krishnamurti Center in Ojai.
Because of Annie Besant. Annie Besant and Ledbetter adopted him, and they decided that he was going to be the world teacher. They thought he was going to be Lord Maitreya. And so they kind of groomed him, and he did go on to be a cult leader of sorts, but he actually rejected the idea that he was the Messiah, and he abandoned the whole thing and walked away from them. But they did adopt him, and that was the plan. So they brought him back from India.
Right. And when he was announced the world teacher from India, Crowley disputed it and said, "No, I'm the world teacher." So there's all these like Crowley connections of all these people who ended up at these new age places. Sedona was the name of the other place I was
Oh,
trying to
that's
think
right,
of.
Sedona. Yes.
Sedona and some of these other new age guys, they all ended up in these little centers. But Santa Fe is one of them. So I think to see it within the context of this kind of new age or forward thinking people, this game I think is within that context. So
I think very much so, and that's a great way to kind of set the stage here because it's interesting. Jim Rudd. So a lot of the game B context, right? All these players tend to be in that new age space, right? There's Zach Stein, and he was inducted to the Club Rome back in last year, 2024.
wow.
And he was one of the makers of that Game B film, right? For 2022, I believe it was. And so it's pretty recent, even though Game B goes all the way back to 2011, the Stanton meetings. And then who else are some of like the Daniel Schmachtenberger? So Zach Stein is really interesting because Zach Stein is one of the trio that comprises David Temple, who made that first values and first principles of evolving perennialism manifesto on cosmoerotic humanism. And I don't know why the pen name is David Temple, because they divulge the three names. It's Zach Stein, it's Mark Gaffney. How could we forget Mark Gaffney? Mark Gaffney did that interview on Dr. Phil, I think it was, where he's trying to exonerate himself from the alleged accusations that he had some underage, activity that was not so kosher. And his justification was that she was 13 going on 30. And so, he was totally vindicated, of course. And but he's involved in doing, and people can watch it for themselves. I'm not making any claims, that's for you to decide. However, he's right now involved in with Aubrey Marcus in doing this Eros Mystery School. And so Eros, he says, is a radical love affair with the universe, and it's not at all sexual. But of course, we remember, Eros and Thanatos, that's Freud, and then we had Eros and Civilization, Herbert Marcuse, and of course, it's Marcuse's world, and we're all just living in it. And now he's got this Eros Mystery School, and he literally talks about how we have to revive these ancient mysteries. So this is Mark Gaffney, who is part of this cosmoerotic humanism manifesto, and you can find the manifesto at the officeofthefuture.com because they're futurists. It's easy to predict the future when you plan it, so they are futurists. And then we've got Mark Gaffney, Zach Stein, and then the other one of that trio, Mark Gaffney is spelled Gafni, I believe, but the other
this
one
isn't the same one right here. Mark H. Gaffney is not it.
Okay. No, it's Gafni. If you look up Eros Mystery School, it'll come right up.
Gafni. Okay, sorry.
So while you're looking for it, I'll tell you the other one is Kenneth Wilber, and he's really interesting, right? His whole theory of integralism, and there he is. That's Mark Gaffney.
Okay.
He's a very interesting character. Zach Stein, is a part of that trio, and Mark Gaffney is involved. He's kind of adjacent to this Game B stuff too. He does quote dialogues, which has been shifted. I'm actually working on a piece elaborating on this concept, but dialogues, of course, originally we think of like Platonic dialogues, the Socratic method, which actually was about confrontation. It was all about asking questions that forced you to, usually that were confrontational, to force you to evolve your position or to defend your position. But now dialogues has kind of, and I think it's really the Theosophists who have shifted it. And I have some evidence to corroborate this, but it might go back even earlier. But dialogues has now become kind of code for consensus It's, you know, really, they distinguish it from discourse. It's about creating consensus. So usually when you have these dialogues online, right, in these forums, these podcasts or these conferences, it's people who are all very amenable to each other, agree with each other. And it's about creating an echo chamber that spoon feeds the audience. And then the audience, you know, because they're not hearing any other viewpoint, is more likely to be indoctrinated with this perspective. But yeah, he's very involved in dialogues with them. So we've got, so that's the three.
And this guy is very close to Joe Rogan. This guy, I think Marcus, this Aubrey Marcus runs his.
Well, Aubrey Marcus and Joe are, they're buddies.
Yeah, they're close. I think they're business partners. I could be wrong.
I think, is it On It?
On It, yeah. I think that's their performance, whatever, their vitamin shop. Yeah.
Yes. Well, Joe Rogan has platformed like so many of these Game B people.
Yeah.
Like
it's a long list, right?
The whole list. Daniel Schmachtenberger has been on, and he's part of that Consilience project. He's also involved in the Neurohacker, which has now been renamed Qualia. Then he's got Travis, I think it's Travis Harris, who is also involved in the Consilience project. Joe Rogan recently platformed him. Then who else do we have? Of course, the Weinstein brothers, and Eric is not as involved in Game B, but Brett was like one of the founding, when he went all the way back to the Stanton meeting back in 2011, 2012, when they were trying to create this Emancipation Party. And I think we discussed that the last time, but the Emancipation Party platform, just to recap for people if they don't remember, if they haven't seen the last episode, but that was it was a whole concept that's very similar to some of these other movements, like the, One Nation Party or the United Independent Party or One Life Party. It's this idea of what Game B calls a trans-political, and it's the idea of going beyond, these two-party systems where, of course, we get our Hegelian synthesis. And I actually just this weekend wrote a book on, I'm still finishing it up, but on the Hegelian dialectic and its esoteric roots. And I talk about how the Hegelian dialectic essentially is a Gnostic Jacob's ladder. And he codified it into what I believe looks like a machinery for control. But I talk about how it traces all the way back to these ancient mystery cults who were always trying to unify opposites. And he just really systematized it in a way that can be weaponized for political, psychological, epistemic warfare. And I think it's now it's being really exacerbated by the cybernetic feedback loops that we see today.
So isn't that whole calculation, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, it's magical? It predates Hegel, right?
It's hermetic. It's really alchemical. So Hegel actually never said thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It was Johann, I'm probably mispronouncing it. I don't do well with German, but Johann Gottlieb Fichte, that was his interpretation, of course, and they wrote in German. It was not in English, but the translation would be thesis, antithesis, synthesis, which was the translation of Kant's dialectic. However, Hegel and Fichte himself was very interesting. He was tied in with all of the Illuminati circles through his friend Pestalozzi. And Pestalozzi was really instrumental in exporting the Prussian model of education, certainly to the United States. And there's ties there with not just the Illuminati, but Skull and Bones. But Pestalozzi and Fichte were very close friends, and actually Fichte popularized a lot of Pestalozzi's ideas on education and was very instrumental in promulgating the notion that we should replace the family with the state. Wow. And so Fichte himself he's a whole can of worms and very interesting. But Fichte interpreted Kant's notion of the dialectic. There was Plato's notion, there was Kant's notion, and Fichte interpreted Kant's to be thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And then it was Schalibus, Schalibus, I'm probably mispronouncing his name too, who was a huge fan of Hegel, a Hegel scholar, and he popularized this trilectic, the triad of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. But Hegel himself actually rejected both Kant and Plato's notion of the dialectic because he felt that it was too intellectual, it was too abstract. He wanted something that could be a methodology that would advance the historicity of man, really to evolve the Geist into the absolute. which is, the rational evolving of the spirit, and that would be God. So that's why I say it's a Gnostic Jacob's ladder, because it's a path to heaven, but it's not God, as you think of it from the biblical framework, but God from the notion of God as kind of the state. And he doesn't translate it necessarily to the state, but he translates it to this like rational ideal, which is kind of correlative to what becomes the state. But yeah.
So their concept of God is not the Old Testament, New Testament concept, right? Not even close.
Not even close, and neither are, I can't speak for all these Game B people. Some of them seem to be more atheistic, but, people like Gaffney definitely are very inspired by Kabbalah. I would say Schmachtenberger as well. However,
isn't this the bottom of the Kabbalah right here at Zach Stein's website? I mean, I think that's it.
That's what it does look like.
Yeah, sorry. So I'm sorry.
But no, yeah, that does. Yeah, you're great with the symbols. Yeah, I think
so. So these guys are all. This is an associate member of the Club of Rome, just like you said. So these guys are all into the Kabbalah. Can you expound on that?
Yeah, and Kabbalah was also really, so Kabbalah is interesting because I don't know that much about Kabbalah, but what I do know is there are several iterations of Kabbalah. And so the original Kabbalah is very different from Kabbalah as it's, studied as a form of Jewish mysticism today. And I will just make this distinction. The Kabbalah is not Judaism. And in fact, Madame Blavatsky, who, she was one of the founding members of Theosophical Society, and occultist, really a Satanist, but she herself talks about how Theosophy is fundamentally diametrically opposed to any monotheistic religion. And she specifically calls out Judaism and traditional Christianity, but she explicitly says they welcome all forms of Kabbalistic variation. So Kabbalistic Judaism, Kabbalistic Christianity, Kabbalistic Islam, all of those are very welcome into the theosophical framework. So it is not, a lot of people conflate the two, but Kabbalah is not Judaism. It is a mystified variation, but even the original Kabbalah is very different than what we think of Kabbalah today, or what people who may be schooled in Kabbalah today. Gaffney, I believe, is a Kabbalah trained rabbi, but they talk about, so the Lurianic Kabbalah, and I believe that was in the 1600s. The big difference that I know of is that it changed the whole meaning of the Tikkun Olam. And Tikkun Olam initially had meant it was like your it's not salvation in the Christian sense, but it was like a sense of you doing your biblical duties and your honoring the commandments, and then it would create a unity under God. And that was kind of the initial, like, it was about creating a unity, but it was under God. And then the Tikkun Olam in the Lurianic Kabbalah changed it to be more about social justice. And over time, that's evolved more and progressed quite a bit. And that's why you see a lot of these temples have become so, woke and left-leaning. And it's because of this notion of Tikkun Olam, which has become translated now to be about the greater good, as opposed to being,
it's like healing the world or something. It's like you go out and heal the world.
I'm sorry?
Yourself. It's not like you heal the world like this Tikkun Olam.
Yeah.
That's my understanding. It's something, it's like world, setting the world straight or something.
But it's about healing the world through it's really social justice, and they couch it in for the greater good. It's about the greater good, and that's really what it's come to mean. But that major shift happened under the Lurianic Kabbalah, and that is not Judaism. That is not even the original meaning under the Kabbalah. So, but Kabbalah does talk a lot about the unification of opposites and transcending that. So. Yeah, like the good and evil and the primeval evil. So,
gotcha.
Yes. So, yeah. So, but all of these, I will just say there's a lot of players in this Game B thing. And even, so Jim Rutt was kind of the originator. He was talking about, he wanted to create this, new platform for a political party. And I was talking about some of these other trans-political movements. And so that's very much what this is. And they are big proponents of dissolving the nation state. This is where I get concerned. Wow. And they're really advocating things like a network state. Now, the last time I looked, there's a network state website where Srinivasan, who is the one who coined this term, he wrote the book, The Network State. It's been championed now by people like Peter Thiel. In fact, there's a whole chapter in Srinivasan's book on seasteading. And he says that the network state was largely modeled after seasteading, and seasteading was a concept that Peter Thiel came up with. I think he donated $1.7 million to the cause of seasteading, which for him, it's not a whole lot of money. For some of us, that's a lot of money. But it went belly up. It was not successful. But a lot of this concept of the network state is predicated on it. And he does have a section on this seasteading concept. But now Peter Thiel has championed this idea of a network state. And the very simple way to explain it, as you can see, it's a pretty long book. So, there's more to it. But, the elevator pitch is that they're favoring a dissolution of of nation states in favor of these ideological network states. So network as in internet online communities. And a lot of these Game B proponents do seem to be very supportive of this concept. And on the network state website, they actually have like a bunch of concepts or, ideas that have been accepted or communities that have been accepted. And the last time I checked, Game B was still pending, and Srinivasan was, he had like checked it that he's, pending its approval. So I don't know if it's been admitted as part of like an official network state yet. But the concept of it is very much aligned with these network states. And it's an organic, at least that's how they frame it, kind of concept. Jim Rutt himself says that it is, it's developing. It's not something that exists yet. It's really kind of communities. And they, one of the words they love to use is decentralized. They keep talking about how everything's decentralized. My concern with it is that, the mysterious school. My concern with it is that it might be decentralized in the way that H.G. Wells imagined would lead to the ideal centralization of a world brain, which was literally the title of his book. And that was actually his concept, was that you would have, he didn't outline these types of technologies that we have today, but he talked about how decentralized institutions like various, universities and different institutions would be the decentralized institutions would collectively self-organize into a world brain. And with the internet, I think that's way more probable than it was, at the time we conceptualized it. And then, of course, we have like Jantz later. He had a very similar concept. He had a book called The Self-Organizing Universe. So this concept has been refined, and I think that's where we're going with this. So he had this idea of doing this political party, and they keep talking about trans-political movements. And the framework for it was very much like it was kind of a Bernie Sanders platform. They talk about things like universal basic income, which they're very much in favor of. They talked about things like, like changing the tax structure, universal health care. The Emancipation Party, the reforms that they had are still available to find. I think it's emancipationreform.org. So you can still find it. They've actually, updated that site pretty recently. However, they, gave up on the idea of doing a political party. They found that was not very popular amongst the millennials, mostly, that they were such anarchists that they were opposed to any kind of a political party. It was an anathema to them. And so he kept the concept of Game B. Thor Mueller, who was involved in these original Stanton meetings, advised him to keep that for branding purposes. And so they really started to organize this concept of Game B, which he says it's a new operating system for civilization. And so it's really just like an idea. And I will say that there's some ideas that, or some of the criticisms they make are definitely valid. And a lot of the ideas sound great, but my concern is that it's a little utopian, and utopian visions often end up being somewhat dystopian. But when I was originally, to circle back, when I was talking about the original inception of it, Jim Rutt, going back to his complexity theorist, training, because he was the chairman of the Santa Fe Institute, which interestingly enough is actually how he met Jordan Hall. And Jordan Hall is another very interesting character who's also been on Joe Rogan. And Jordan Hall has he's changed his name like several times. I don't know what that's about, but he was originally R. Jordan Greenhall. And then he became Jordan Greenhall, and now he's Jordan Hall. And he's recently, as of about a year ago, and I still have to listen to this episode, but he converted to Christianity, which is also very interesting. We see a lot of these recent Christian converts, but Christian converts who talk about things like Christ consciousness.
Right. Scary terms like Christ consciousness. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly, which is not Christian at all, but it's very couched in Christianese. Now, I haven't listened to enough of Jordan to make, a claim on his religious stance. I don't know enough. But when he talks about things like metacrisis, which is a big, thing he talks about, he's behind these Civium projects, and Civium projects sound kind of a lot like, smart cities, essentially. I'll actually read you what the Civian Project is. It's a conceptual framework for reimagining human civilization beyond the constraints of a traditional city structure and nation states. So again, they want to transcend nation states. Where have we heard this before? This is like straight out of Brzezinski, Kissinger, right? And it's rooted in game B principles, and they keep talking about like they call them proto Bs, which is like the emerging kind of testing grounds for game B. And Jim Rutt, in his On a Journey to Game B, that I think he did it in 2018, updated it. He's updated it several times since. But he predicts that the emerging like proto Bs will be around 2045, which I just think is very interesting because we have Ray Kurzweil claims the singularity is nearer in 2045. We have the AI World Society 2045.
Wow.
We have that Dmitry, I forgot his last name, but the Russian guy who's envisioning kind of like a transhuman agenda 2045. So there's a lot of like a whole biodigital convergence that comes to fruition at that time. So it's an interesting year that he predicts that's when it's going to be. The Civium envisions decentralized networked communities. So I keep trying to point that out, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the Game B kind of economies, because I think that's very integral, and it's a really important concept for people to understand because of the emerging technologies and how that plays a role in what it will actually mean for people. But the concept DeFi is something you hear all the time. And you hear this with the technology. They're advocating DeFi, like DeFi, decentralized finance, or decentralized technology. And my concern with this is that they couch it in these very freedom-minded type of terms, things that are going to be very, amenable to those who are freedom-minded. But I don't know how it's actually possible for it to be decentralized. That I have not seen. I've not seen any evidence that it actually is. They keep talking about things like digital sovereignty, and I don't know how you can achieve digital sovereignty. That sounds like an oxymoron to me.
Right, to me too.
Yeah. So they leverage advanced technology, and this is also just an interesting concept because if you watch the Game B movie, at the end of it, they actually talk about, the whole concept of Game B, just to recap again for people, is that it's all about non-rivalrous, communities and civilization. So I think of it the way I really kind of conceptualize it is this idea of moving, the new age concept. We're moving out of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. I mean, even just look at the website for the film. But this was what the Changing Images of Man document was all about, right? This is out of Stanford Research Institute. And I kind of think of the Santa Fe Institute as like the Tavistock of America, even though the formal Tavistock of America is the A.K. Rice Institute, they actually like transposed all of Bayin's theories, group dynamic research, and workshops there. But of course, so did Esalen. And Santa Fe, I think, really harnessed the cybernetic component. That's kind of the systems theory, complexity theory. That's really their strong focus. And yeah, so when you look at the film, the end of the film, they talk about how we have to move out of, so they start out the film talking about proto-game A, which is very much like this Neoplatonic kind of society. It looks very much kind of like the ancient pagan religions and indigenous cultures, and very tribal. And then we move into, so that's the first one. And then they say game A emerges. And then they talk about game B, how it hasn't been created yet. And the pioneer, that's the protagonist, has the opportunity to co-create game B. And that's an interesting term too, because that's very reminiscent of people like Barbara Marx Hubbard, right? And a lot of these people who are just even on the game B film making list are disciples of Barbara Marx Hubbard. And Barbara Marx Hubbard was, of course, a disciple of, she was a huge fan of Teilhard de Chardin, championed the concept of a noosphere, was good friends with people like Buckminster Fuller. She called him Bucky. In fact, she talked about how she was so excited to tell her friend Bucky that she took it upon herself to rewrite the New Testament, because everybody needs to rewrite the New Testament.
Yeah, that guy Gaffney was her disciple, the guy that you mentioned earlier.
Yes, Gaffney. Well, okay, so when they wrote that book, Cosmoerotic Humanism, Gaffney, Stein, and Wilbur were the ones who wrote that. And Stein, was it Steiner? No, I think it was Gaffney who actually talks about, I believe it was Gaffney. He talks about how they co-created the concept of cosmoerotic humanism. He said it was synchronicity, and it was a synergistic experience where, they co-created it together because they had this ecstatic telepathic experience where they both simultaneously created it. And so that's how they came up with the title. But that's interesting too, because Barbara Marx Hubbard also was very inspired by Abraham Maslow. And she talks about how Abraham Maslow taught her about Upsychian networking. And for those who aren't familiar with that concept, I don't know if I talked about it last time, but the Upsychian network. So Maslow is very famous for his hierarchy of needs and the concept of self-actualization. And he actually never designed an actual hierarchy. That was something that, was put into textbooks for, teaching material. And he actually speaks against a hierarchy. He makes it very clear that it's not a distinct, literal hierarchy. But what he was really focused on was something outside of that. He was talking about that as a stepping stone to get to what's called B values, which is short for being values. And being values, he felt that were, really elevated from these basic hierarchy of needs. And it was people who were self-actualized who could start addressing these being values. And those people could be part of something called the Upsychian network. And the Upsychian network were people who could focus on things like religion and politics. And then in 1971, he posthumously, Bertha Maslow, his wife, had taken something that he was working on called Politics 3 and presented it to Robert Cantor and Willis Harman. Now, Willis Harman was the, I believe, president of the Institute of Noetic Science, which is IONS, right? And that's very closely connected to Barbara Marx Hubbard. And then he was also working on the Changing Images of Man document for Stanford Research Institute. And so he created this Politics 3, which in it talks about holistic politics, which I think very much inspired, Robert Mueller, who talks about planetics. But yeah, so you've got all of these overlaps. And in the Changing Images of Man document, they talk about going from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, which is now talking about the collective. It's for the greater good. It's, they want to move out of the age of the industrial era. They want to move out of the age of the individual, no longer have competition. Competition is, they say it's going to lead to self-extinction. And so they want to move into, game B calls it non-rivalrous, but the age of Aquarius would call it, for the greater good, the collective. And game B actually has a concept called collective intelligence. So you can see how all of these ideas start to converge. They're right. Very much talking about these having a collective brain.
Collective brain, systems, networks, utopia. Somebody needs to tell me one utopia that's turned out well. Like that's really it. Has there ever really?
That's what I'm saying. It's like it's not. I mean, some of these ideas, it's not that they don't sound bad. It's just that I think they're leading to it's a utopia which doesn't exist, and oftentimes in practical application, it becomes dystopian.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'll read some of the rest of what he says about the Civium project. This is network communities that leverage advanced technology, collective intelligence, regenerative systems to create more resilient, self-sustaining societies. Now, this is all kind of aligned with like UN agenda. They're very much a proponent of the climate science. This is Deep Code. This is Jordan Hall's. But it was actually a collaborative project with Jim Rutt originally. Then remember they met at the Santa Fe Institute. It's so much. I know there's like such a web, so there's so much to unpack. But so he says that is regenerative systems to create more resilient, self-sustaining society. Hall contrasts Civium with cities, arguing that urban centers designed for game A, competition and centralized control, are becoming obsolete in the face of exponential technological change. Okay, so before I read on, that's what I was saying about the film. So they talk about moving into game B, which doesn't exist yet. This is, theoretical concept where we have the opportunity to co-create it. But what I find very interesting is they keep saying that game A is exploitative and it's extractive, but then they talk about how game B is going to use the technologies from game A. I'm not sure how that's not exploitative or extractive, but they're going to use the technologies of game A. But Jordan, actually, and I was listening to a recent podcast on the Denizen show with Jim Rutt as well, and he was talking about how we want to create use psychotechnologies in order to restore kind of like a pre-industrial type of human, but then use that kind of person to immerse them in a game B society with this emerging technology. And that
sounds dangerous. Like, what's that? Is that going to be a Neuralink or something like that?
So psychotechnologies can be Neuralink, but it could also be, they said it could be yoga, it could be meditative. It's really any. So when he describes it, he says anything created by humans that's essentially for humans. And but he specifically listed, he said meditation, yoga. It can be technology that assists. So it could be something like heart math. It could be Neuralink. He did include that. He said that absolutely could be. So it's just a really wide encompassing, term. But yeah, I just thought that was very, yeah, I agree. Dangerous is the right word. That you're going to take these kind of like very pre-industrialized type of mindset and immerse them into this new system, this collaborative system. And to me, that just runs the risk of now you're eroding individuality, right? You're eroding individual consciousness in favor of this kind of collective subsuming of people into this space, which technology has the potential to really accentuate,
right? So accentuating collectivism is like utopianism, where has collectivism ever come out well? Like at the other end, when everything's collected and somebody's telling you what the collective is supposed to do, I mean, it's inherently coercive and antithetical to kind of liberty and libertarian ideas, I think.
Yes. I would absolutely agree. I'm also concerned because they're kind of using the essence of libertarianism in order to promulgate a lot of these ideas. I'm not saying they specifically, but you see this with people like Peter Thiel, right? They're trying to build like this Prospera Bitcoin cities, which the subsidiary is Vitalia, which is kind of a life extension type of organization. And it's couched in this libertarian, this idea of decentralization, but it's all done through network state. And if you really study people like Peter Thiel, which I would say again, because they are proponents of the network state. I haven't seen direct interaction with Peter Thiel, so I'm not making that claim, but the ideas do seem to have overlap. But they champion these things, which if you look at his history, I mean, the Straussian moment, which is, it's like a 30-page everybody to read
Teal
it.
is nudging stuff like, hey, we got to get rid of this system. We might have to rethink this system. I think that's what he said. Like, hey,
exactly. And if you even look at the history of the libertarian movement, right, it's kind of an outgrowth of the Walter Lippmann colloquium. We remember Walter Lippmann. He wasn't exactly your individual liberties guy, but that became the Mont Pelerin Society, which is like a huge consortium of all these think tanks that are quote unquote right wing, people like the Heritage Foundation, Hoover, Hudson. It's all like tied to like Koch brother money, for instance. The Atlas network is part of the Mont Pelerin Society, and that's a huge network of hundreds of organizations. One of them being Americans for, I call them Americans for Propaganda, but Americans for Prosperity, and they're pumping all sorts of money into things that, you know, ostensibly are being called conservative or Republican, but they're not at all. You know, agendas like school choice that Americans for Prosperity are peddling very heavily and dumping tons of money. I've seen it firsthand in my own state. So they're pumping so much money into it. And we know that agenda it's not, you know, about liberty at all. There's no choice when the government strings are attached. We already have a choice. You have a God-given right to educate your children as you see fit. And that is not, you know, up to the government. But when you start taking money from the government, whatever the government funds, it runs. So, but they're championing things like that. So I just wanted, that's a kind of a side note, but just the, you know, the outgrowth of the whole libertarian movement. And I know the Mont Pelerin Society, there was a split with Mises and Rothbard and Rothblatt. I get that, but this is still kind of the inception of that movement. So, and then there's also, you know, like von Hayek and his ties to the Austrian School of Economics, which has ties to the London School of Economics, and it's a whole nother rabbit hole, but
it ties together. I think you're making an interesting point, because I've done other episodes on Teal and this kind of techno optimist, and I think it's this new, something that people should keep an eye out for, is this kind of new tech utopianism, which I think Gamby is part of.
So I think what we're seeing right now, and this ties to my whole book on the Hegelian dialectics, right? Because I think what we're seeing, we had this, and Brzezinski and Kissinger would talk about this. They kind of predicted, or maybe they steered it, but they would talk about how you would have the clashing of the East and the West, and that would, you know, so kind of the idea of like fascism and communism against a, you know, more democratic or constitutional republic type, capitalist type of societies, and that they would clash against each other. We would have this ongoing battle, and what would emerge was the synthesis, the synthetic concretization, as Hegel would have called it, because he didn't use thesis antithesis synthesis. He actually said abstract negative concrete, and he talked about Aufheben, which was, you know, the kind of oxymoronic term that I see as the rungs on the Gnostic Jacob's ladder, so you can go up the spiral towards creating the absolute, which is God. But they talked about how what would emerge from this synthesis would be the technocracy. And I think what we're seeing now is very, very clever, and it's very subtle. But we're seeing kind of these different flavors of technocracy. And I keep trying to encourage people that, you know, if you've got chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry, but they're all ice cream, they're still all ice cream. They're different varieties of the same thing. Yes, there are nuanced differences. I don't want to, you know, just, you know, broad stroke it and say there's no, you know, nuance to it. But what we're seeing is like a flavor of left wing type of technocracy, which I think Game B is much more aligned with. And then we're seeing a right-wing technocracy, which is, you know, like the Peter Thiel couched in libertarianism, or Elon Musk, you know, part of the Trump administration, so he must be Republican and pro-liberty. So we're seeing these kind of labels and like the different nominalism is essentially what we're seeing. And I think people are, because they're so programmed to cheer for their team, it's when it's being done with these guys, it's good. When it's being done with these guys, it's bad. And, you know, take your pick. It's not, I'm not advocating one or the other, but I'm saying if you're somebody who identifies with the right-wing banner, you're like, oh, Elon and Peter Thiel, the flavor of technocracy is better. Or if you align with,
Right.
a left
You
wing.
can have a more collectivized technological
But
network.
ultimately, it leads to tyranny. And I think that, the kind of so when you had the East-West battle, so we're seeing kind of this like more centralized variation of like the UN kind of AI world society top-down structure, which is going to be much more accepted in places like China that already have something kind of similar. And in fact, the AI World Society says that they're kind of modeled off of the China model. So places that are like in the East where they're more, accepting of a top-down kind of centralized structure. But in the West, I think this idea of something like central bank digital currencies, we already have Trump banning them, right? People are not going to accept them as readily. I'm not saying everybody, but I think it's less favorable. So you're going to have a more where they can kind of brainwash you, for lack of a better word, into or shame you into
Right.
it's for the greater good, and you want to opt in. I don't want to say have to. You want to opt in. Look, we're creating a gamified society where we're going to do all this good, and I'll get into things like B Labs and B Corps, where we're going to save the planet. We're going to end the fiat currency, even though now you're going to have a tokenized economy, which
Right.
I don't know how that's going to work out.
It's going to be almost like I could imagine them selling this almost like they sold the COVID shots, right? Like, this is your next step. This is so good. You can't go back and you can't
Yeah.
resist this. This is our way. And we've got it all planned out. And it's going to be a paradise or a utopia. So I think this is something to really be concerned about. All these proponents of this, it's just the same thing like the iron law of the oligarchy. Who's going to be running game B? All these guys are doing the thinking, right? It's not going to be you and me, right? Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. So what I will say is like it's being presented as very organic. So there's a Game B Facebook page, and it is a lot of people just presenting their ideas and almost like a think tank where people just collaborate. I think they have a Discord group. I'm not privy to that, but that's what I've heard Jim Rutt talk about. They do have, obviously, they have the Game B wiki, which Jordan Hall and Jim Rutt have said they have nothing to do with. I think Jim Rutt may have a little bit more, but Jordan Hall said he has nothing to do with this Game B wiki page, but they very much, they support it. And they've actually been asked about various components of it, and they've said, yeah, that explains it really well. And they've kind of championed this notion of how it's so collaborative, and they're communicating these ideas even better than they would. So they're in line with this kind of school of thought that's being presented on the Game B wiki. So it's a collaboration, but my concern is that, again, it's utopian because anytime who will ultimately run this, and also what are the ideas of the people. So this is when you look at things like B corporations, and B corporations are not a small thing. There's already 6,000 companies that are B Corps, and this is a subsidiary of B Labs, and B Labs is the one who certifies them. Companies like Ben and Jerry's, Patagonia, they're really big companies, and as I said, 6,000 of them to date, and they have something called an SDG adapter. So this is all about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and this is very much in line with the UN's, the World Economic Forum, and they have a whole. You can go look at it, bcorporation.net. This is under B Labs, is who and Game B thought leaders like Jim Rudd have said, this is not Game B, but it's a part of it. So they champion it. They're very supportive of B Corps, and that would be a great way to create this type of regenerative society where we're doing more good for the planet, and where we're fighting the climate change issue. I just think that it's like, even if they think they're doing good, which honestly, I mean, a lot of these people seem like nice people. I don't think I actually don't think the Game B people are intentionally trying. They actually speak often about how they're very against any kind of like centralized control. They don't want top-down authoritarian kind of structures, and I think they may actually mean it. However, when you understand the history of things like cybernetics and the history of these kind of complexity theories and the way that technologies, emerging technologies like Web3, like Holon chains, how all of and tokenized economies, which actually they end if Game B even has like their own for the film, they have an NFT for Game B, and the end of the film is with the girl opening her hand, and it's a coin. So they're championing this, and they're talking about it as a gift economy, a regenerative economy. They talk about the degrowth concept, and they're really smart people, so they're great with words and manipulating words. And I don't mean to say that pejoratively, but they do redefine words. Like I have this example right here. This is straight out of Jordan Hall's Deep Code, and it's on sovereignty. And he starts this whole thing off talking about Jordan Peterson and how Jordan Peterson's concept of responsibility. And on the Game B wiki, they put Jordan Peterson as a Game B kind of person, although he's kind of like periphery, but I think they do condone his message. But he says the word sovereignty, and he says, by sovereignty, I do not mean the notion that states have the right to self-determination on the geopolitical stage. I also don't mean that individuals are magically able to separate themselves from the rest of the human world and make up their own rules. I mean something very specific, very central to being in the world, and properly understood, it's empowering. Sovereignty is the capacity to take responsibility. It's the ability to be present in the world, to respond to the world, rather than be overwhelmed or merely reactive. Sovereignty is to be a conscious agent. And then later he goes on to talk about your ability to make sense of the world. And the sense making is one of the concepts of Game B. And really, when I dive into it, it kind of just looks like, dialogues. It's consensus making. And they're all about, because it's non-rivalrous, right? So everything has to be about the collective and collaborative. And that all sounds great. I mean, who doesn't want to live in a world where, everybody can sing Kumbaya? But I don't know how realistic that is. And my concern is that when you think about concepts like the noosphere, you're eroding free will, you're eroding individual consciousness. And so you're fundamentally changing what it means to be human. And like I said, I don't think that that's necessarily their intention. I think they're utopianists. And so I think they really think that they're going to change the world for the better. But I don't know, especially with the technologies, if that's the direction.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that these could be the path to hell is paved with good intentions, right?
Yeah,
like they could all be, and then somebody comes in like Stalin and perverts the whole system. So you have, the Bolshevik groups are all, working together, but you got at the top who makes the ultimate decisions. So like, what's to say there's not somebody waiting in the wings to take over the whole thing? And I think the people who kind of structured the U.S. were much more cynical than these types of people, which is look, things always go bad. So let's disperse powers and let's have these people kind of competing against each other. So that there's a lack of that kind of like realisticness.
Competition as a buffer. Our founding fathers, competition was used as a buffer against the tyranny. And here they want to eradicate competition. And this comes out of people like, these evolutionary leaders who, again, people like Barbara Marx Hubbard, right? Bruce Lipton, what does he say? He talks about how we're going to start with amoeba. They're single cell organisms and their intelligence comes from their membrane. And then he gets to humans. They're, super complex multicellular organisms. But he says the reason they're so intelligent, and he uses a spiral, like the Hegelian dialectical spiral, right? To describe this. And he says that the reason humans are so intelligent is because they have so much membrane, surface area of membrane, and that's where they collect all of their information. But he says we're at a point where we might become extinct. And so we have the option to co-create, and we should co-create a superorganism of humanity. And what does he say the membrane for humanity is going to be? It's the internet. So it's these concepts I just think have a very they're pernicious. But I can read you the rest of the Sivian project and
please do.
Okay, so regenerative systems to create more resilient, self-sustaining societies. Hall contrasts the civium with cities, arguing that urban centers designed for game A, competition, and centralized control are becoming obsolete in the face of exponential technological change. Instead, a civium would be distributed, cybernetic, and peer-governed ecosystem using blockchain, AI-driven coordination, and post-rivalrous economic models to support human flourishing. Human flourishing is a very interesting term. This is like, there's actually a whole website. It's called Human Flourishing, and it's a partnership with Harvard. They're doing a whole human flourishing project, and they call it like it's about humanity 2.0. So that means humanity 1.0 is done, right? So I think when he says human flourishing, that's an esoteric signal. By integrating new governance systems, and I just want to clarify, when I say esoteric, I don't necessarily mean like he's trying to be cryptic. It's just that people who are in the know what that means. Whereas if you just hear human flourishing, I mean, to me, human flourishing is living well and, vitality. But I don't think that's what he's referencing. I think he's referencing a very specific term. By integrating new governance systems, digital psychotechnologies, and cooperative organizational structures, things like DAOs, right? The decentralized autonomous organizations. The civium aims to transcend existing societal limitations and enable a future of adaptive, decentralized self-organization. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that's a whole nother thing. Like the other thing that's concerning is all these people seem to have interests in other structures, Club of Rome, or Teal is all over the place. Mount Pelerin, Bilderberg, associated with the Knights of Malta, if not one. Like what else is going to come into this? Like once they've got people hooked into this little utopia of game B, like, well, we're now going to roll out game C, guys. Didn't you get this memo? like something like that. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was another, I'm going to see if I can find, here it is. Okay, so this is from the GameBee website, and I just thought this was kind of interesting because it kind of expounds on a lot of these concepts. So he says, Jermaine Marvel requested someone to share this to GameBee and said as a sentiment that I deeply resonate with, and I have opted to share it. To those with allergies to postmodernism, hi, I hope you are all well. Personally, I don't need a full-throated rejection of anything specific to modernism or postmodernism from you or anyone. All I will ask is we accept that we neutralize intolerances and supremacies, right? Yes, because we accept all is one, including wealth, white, and woke supremacies, all of them. The idea that anyone these days is truly postmodern or modern is defunct, in my opinion. We are hyper-modernity. So everything seems to be this like exaggerated. They talk about meta-crisis, meta-modernity. Everything's in this kind of meta kind of, because they talk about, the people like the cosmoerotic humanists are talking about going from Homo sapiens to Homo universalis, which is very reminiscent of H.G. Wells.
Right, or this changing image of man from one species to another. Like that really should make you sit up in your chair. Like that's super creepy to me.
That's exactly right. Because what was changing images man document all about? It was about changing human consciousness and changing humans' perception of humans.
Right. Wow.
So then he says, to hypomodernism to get, trying to support each other with a little hypomodernism to get, right, again, going pre-modernity, to get meta-modernity and beyond, right? We have to go backwards to go forwards. That's kind of what Jordan Hall said, too, about technology. My belief is that the roots of almost all of our problems are due to dichotomous thinking, with dichotomous intentions leading to dichotomous perspectives and relationships. It can only lead to dichotomous knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, right? Because they don't want any discrepancy, no differentiation. Everything has to be all collaborative. And this can only result in dichotomous win-lose cultures. So again, with this like non-rivalrous, this is also very reminiscent of Erner by Werner Weinhardt, right? Einhardt. That's
Is
it.
Werner
Werner Einhardt.
Erhard?
I thought it was Einhardt, but you might be right. But the EST workshops that he was doing,
Yeah.
right? And then Esalen took them, and then the Landmark Forum, and now there's offshoots of that all over.
I think it's Werner Erhard, yeah. But that's not his real name. I think his name was like Bob Biggelstein or something.
I think you're right. Yeah. But it's very reminiscent of it. In fact, I actually did one of these. I did two of these kind of workshops. And I knew they were communist brainwashing. I actually told my sister when I brought her into one of them, I was like, this is communist brainwashing. And the big thing that took me off was that when you walk into the room, they have everybody hold hands and they play the song Imagine, the Beatles song. Imagine.
Oh, wow.
And everybody cries. And then they start the workshop. And then when you leave the room, they play it again and everybody holds hands. So it was like mesmerism, like a hypnotic kind of a trance that they're trying to put you into this, synthetic.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's what Garth Brooks played for Jimmy Carter's memorial was Imagine. Do you know that?
Yeah.
Yeah, creepy.
Yeah.
Not really a Christian song. Sorry, guys, but anyway.
Oh, no, Imagine there's no religion. They say that. Yeah. But in that workshop, because I did it twice, in both of them, they had this. It was kind of a variation of the prisoner's dilemma. And they actually talk about scenario A, scenario B, and they talk about how one is a win, what is it? A some lose game. And then the other one is a, win-win. So they were talking essentially about game A versus game B. And they did use like letter A, letter B. Yeah. And so they were talking about so the whole goal was to create the win-win. But it was essentially a prisoner's dilemma game. And then there was another one that was similar. It was called the Lifeboat. But yeah, so they and now that's part of SEL, right? That's what they do with kids, these same games. That's part of the social emotional learning in schools.
Wow.
So so dichotomous perspective and relationship can only lead to dichotomous knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. And this can only result in dichotomous win-lose cultures. So we need to go beyond both the win-win and the win-win dinoodle thinking. I don't know what he's saying there. Or you can call it metamodernism, or you can call it spiral dynamics, right? Again, the spiral.
Yeah, but they're also kind of these terms that people at first glance wouldn't know, but these guys know, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I say it is kind of initiatory. It's jargon.
Yeah. Just like they say in this movie, initiation into the game B.
Right there.
Whoa, creepy.
Well, and that guy, Jake Bruce, there's a whole video with him talking about how he's working on something for Disney. And he says that he's gonna Trojan horse game B into this project.
Oh, yeah, I think we played that video last time.
And both Schmachtenberger and Jordan Hall talk about how you have to have an element of social engineering. I don't know that Jordan Hall uses that terminology, but Schmachtenberger does, that you need an element of social engineering to get people into game B.
Right. So you're gonna that's like forcing them in, right? So there's some kind of thing. Wow.
And so then
this is really creepy. I'm good. After the end of these talks, I get more unnerved over time. Oh no, I don't like the language. I don't trust these people who they're around. I don't like their secret groups they're in. Ugh.
Yeah. And it seems so innocuous. So I feel like I seem like the bad guy kind of pointing it out, but like I said, they might have great intentions. I just don't see how. My big concern is that they talk about how this is really much more sociological than it is technological. But of course, you're talking about guys whose background is in tech. So for people who are kind of Luddites and don't have the whole tech awareness or know where technology is today, maybe you can convince them that. But I think even the sociological implications of this are concerning anyway. However, you're talking about Jim Rudd is he's like Mr. Tech, right? He was the network solutions guy. That's like the domain names. That was one of the big companies. Complexity theory, Sensei, all tech. And he's a Mr. Tech investor, and he really understands tech. And he was, on the ground floor of these conversations about AI versus general AI. And then Jordan Hall certainly understands tech. And when you start looking at these Web3 technologies and you're looking at the potential of a tokenized economy, you have, like I was saying before, the top-down structure of central bank digital currency. And I think certainly for your audience, I don't need to, expound on why that might be potentially dangerous. I think most people really understand how that can be a central mechanism for controlling every aspect of our lives, and they don't want that. But a lot of people don't really consider it when they look at it being decentralized and it's something like a network state or it's privatized. It becomes communitarianism. And communitarianism, I think, is really where they're trying to go. And people seem to have this illusion that communitarianism is not going to be tyrannical. And I don't know how many times, what organization have you been to where a leader didn't crop up? This is like straight out of Fred Emery and Wilfred Bian's work, right? Wilfred Bian was really instrumental in creating the War Office Selection Boards at Tavistock right after they had their Operation Phoenix, and they restructured, and then they did these War Office Selection Boards, which was a whole testing protocol for selecting leaders. It started out as for military leaders, and this got implemented in the OSS, which of course became the CIA, and this became a recruitment strategy for grooming. Essentially, I would call them change agents. They don't use that term, but of course, Tavistock uses the term change agents. It's all over their website. They talk about praxis and change agents and Gnostic Reticulus, and they're recruiting them. But
we would call them influencers today, right? Wouldn't it be the same thing, like internet influencers? Or they may present themselves differently, but that's really their impact. They're all over the place.
Change agents. Yeah. Especially the more prominent ones. Absolutely. And I know we talked about this before. I don't think a lot of them are nearly as organic as people think.
Totally
I think there's machines behind them. There's a lot of money behind them. And I'm not saying they're all witting or they all know that. Sometimes I think it's done through cybernetic feedback loops, actually. Algorithmically, I think sometimes it's done that way. Which
I don't think there's any doubt. I'll give you one example, Courtenay. When I watch like something on YouTube and I'll fall asleep, I automatically get the next show is Lex Fridman droning on. I cannot stand Lex Fridman. He's so boring and he's fake. He has no personality, but I've constantly pushed this guy. And so he's getting free digits and free listens and all this from YouTube. And where did he come from?
Who is it?
Just Lex Fridman, that guy who always
Lex Fridman. Oh yeah,
Fridman or whatever.
Where there's like
spelled FRIDMAN.
Real.
Pardon me.
There's debates like online if he's AI.
Really? He might be. He might be.
I don't know. I've just seen people question. I haven't watched enough to know, but yeah.
My maid is giving me a hard time. I don't know what's going on. They keep knocking on my door.
Okay.
Let's see. I think the wrap up is like, we're criticizing, where's the self-criticism for these guys? You wonder, well, could this go wrong? Like, at least when you talk about the founding fathers, they're like, everything's gone wrong in the past. Let's make sure that doesn't happen. But this is like dreamy utopianism.
It is dreamy utopianism. To be fair, I mean, they do criticize the potential, especially when they talk about technology, of it becoming centralized, of it, and they warn against that. So they definitely do talk a little bit about the potential concerns. But I think it's an overly optimistic view of humanity. And it's also a very cynical view of the advancements that, we've made as humans. They're very cynical of a lot of, and it seems like there's just a little bit of a blinders, right? It might be just cognitive dissonance or it's blind spots. I'm not really quite sure, but they don't seem to see the danger of reverting to some sort of they have this very idealistic, romantic notion of the indigenous populations. And yet they want to infuse very, very modern, in some cases, almost futuristic technology with those types of people. I'm using them as our archetype more than, literally. But
that's a real communistic view. I don't know if you know that, but Marx, and I think it was Das Kapital or something, he always idealized the early, nomadic people who shared everything.
Yep.
He philosophized that was the natural state of man, was this all communitarian sharing stuff. Yeah. So.
And that's exactly where they're going. So I think you're absolutely right. This is very Marxist in its roots. It's very Marxist, and communitarianism is essentially, it's Marxism, but this becomes really dangerous when you start talking about the technology layered on top of it, because you have a tokenized economy, and even if it's done through a network state, you still need a digital ID to enter your network state that could have biometric data attached to it. You still have the potential of being censored or kicked out, right? And you also have this kind of Pavlovian type of reward system with tokens. So, if you're a B Corp and you are doing good for the planet, then they might reward you. Or let's say you say something that's not quite so aligned, then you get demerits. So, and this is within your community, but it's, and they can control everything.
Yeah,
so
that's real communistic type stuff, like Soviet Union. Who's going to watch the Watchmen, right? It's the old story.
Yes,
these guys are watching you. It's like the other way around.
Who's watching that? And my concern is that some of these people are being couched as they're thought leaders that people are thinking are the resistance in a lot of cases.
Right.
And I would argue this is heading us just into a dystopian nightmare.
It's two-faced. These resistance leaders aren't that resistful. The alternative media isn't that alternative anymore. Maybe it was back then, but so many people have moved in. It's like, really, it's unnerving to me. But this is also unnerving. Like, it's too utopian. This is too. There's no self-criticism, and the history would think that, like, where's the checks and balances? They're just not there. There's nothing there.
Right. And you're just going to have random voices that come in, but we know how that works out, right? Especially if there's they're telling you they don't want any dissonance. You just heard that guy. I know he's just one person on Facebook, but that's kind of where it's all going. It's all about non-rivalrous. So you don't want to upset the apple cart. What if you don't agree with the ideas?
Right. This is actually from the Santa Fe Institute. Before we wrap this up, this is their monoliths. If you know my show or what I've talked about, the monolith is actually a very creepy thing. And they actually have, they show that it goes back into prehistory. But there's the monolith from 2001. This is the one at the Santa Fe Institute.
Yep.
And there they are goofing around. And if it's about the size that I think it is, it looks like it's 11 feet tall, which is actually even more disturbing. But Courtenay, we are at an hour and 15 minutes. Maybe you can wrap it up. Tell people about your new book. Where can they find your most recent episodes and where they can reach out to you?
Awesome. All right. Well, I can be found at CourtenayTurner.com. I spell my name a little bit differently. So you're listening. And if you're listening and not watching, then it's spelled like Courtenay. It is pronounced Courtenay, although people sometimes like to say Courtenay. So, but it's spelled that way. So CourtenayTurner.com. And you have to spell it that way. Otherwise you won't find me. And that's where you can find all of my episodes, all the ways you can support my work, all the ways that you can find various platforms, to watch my podcast, or various social media platforms. And I really encourage people to check out my Substack. I launched it maybe 6 months ago now, and that is where all of my content is going first. So my paid subscribers are getting early access, and they're also getting ad-free content. I know people don't love ads. I unfortunately need to figure out how to do this and make it sustainable. So I believe it's $8 a month. So it's kind of the cost of like a fancy latte a month. So those of you who might want to.
That's the regular price for coffee these days. It's about $8, believe it or not. If you live in the commie state of California, it's crazy.
It's so nuts. But maybe forgo one of those fancy lattes if you want to see my work continue. I have other ways you can support me as well. But so my book, I am tweaking it now, but I'm going to give my Substack subscribers the sneak peek of the rough draft. and I should have that out by the end of the week. And as I kind of talked a little bit about it, it is I call it a Gnostic. It's Hegel's dialectic, a Gnostic Jacob's ladder, a machinery of control, and that is the title. So that gives you a little sense of what it's all about. And I go through kind of how the ancient mysteries shaped and paved the way for Hegel's dialectic, and then I talk about modern times and how we see it everywhere, and it is how it's weaponized in political, psychological, and epistemological warfare. So you will get a sneak peek with that. My free subscribers will also get a little bit of it free as well. So they get a preview too. And what else is there? Oh, I'm about to be launching a tallow line. This is tallow skincare. We're just trying to figure out how we can monetize so I can keep doing this work. But it's really awesome because all natural. We've been playing around with different variations of it. We've got one that's a hybrid with medicinal grade raw Manuka honey. That's 20 UMF plus. So this is like top grade things that they use, like, for wound healing and that sort of thing. I can't say that it cures or heals anything. I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. I'm just telling you they do use it for that. And it's really raw, like never treated, never heated, and cold pressed process. And I'm super excited about it. And this is like grass-fed, grass-finished tallow, which has all sorts of nutritional properties for your skin. All the fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, K, and E. And yeah, this is what people use before they made all sorts of synthetic chemicals that are endocrine disrupting. So I'm hoping we'll return to real regenerative, not regenerative as in synthetic kind of products. And that's me doing my part. So that's going to be glowwithtallow.com, but I'll have a link on my website. And
Glow with Tallow. So it's all one word. Link is on the website. So they can go to your Substack, your website. I will put links to both of those. And then your podcast as well. You're putting out at least an episode a week, I think.
Yeah, I think at least 2 or 3 a week. We were doing one a day, but we've slowed down a little bit. I have literally 30 that I have not aired yet.
Oh, wow.
Because we are trying to launch the tallow, and I started writing, and I wrote that book, which I still have to finish up, and then I started writing a book on Tavistock also. So
nice. Great.
Yeah.
We'll have to check that out. I'll have to have you on for your new book. So look forward to Courtenay being back on the show to talk about her new book sometime in the next couple of weeks. And again, it's Courtenay Turner. I'll put a link again to the Substack and website. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Stay there.